welcome back everyone. Thanks for watching. So we're going to continue with the third edition in this series, and I'm going to continue with the curve projection on your 3D models, and this will be the main subject for this lesson. So I'm going to continue, and I'm going to show you guys what we will be making, or something similar to something on screen. We have some sort of egg-shaped type of chair, and we're going to use essentially the projection on curves, or project curves on surfaces, combined with some modeling techniques using Polygon and NURB modeling, and this specifically will end up with a result as similar. So what I have in front of me is essentially two types of surfaces. The one is a NURBS surface, and you will find your NURBS surfaces under the surfaces menu set, and also you'll have a tab down here with all the primitives that's available to us. All of these are built on the parametric type of surface modeling technique, and then the one on the left side is more your typical polygon geometry, and that you can find under the polygon menu set. And also just want to turn the polygon menu set active here, and then the tab with all the buttons, all the different primitives. So what's the main difference between the two? Essentially, the one has the ability to calculate the surface method based on an algorithm, calculating it mathematically and then trying to cut the shapes accordingly, whereas this one on this side is purely based on the 3 or 4 component type that makes essentially one polygon. On the one side we have edges, vertices and faces. If you right click on your model, you'll see you have edges, vertices and faces. So these guys are your vertices, here's your face, and finally the edges. If I go back to the NURB surface, you'll see something different. If I go and right click, you'll find you've got isopalms, you've got control vertex, not a regular vertex but a control vertex, and you've got hulls. So these are your main types that kind of matches to what we have on the polygons. So if I just kind of show you guys the difference between the two, if I go to isopalms and I click on these edges over here, you'll actually see a loop that runs all the way around the model. And if I click on this one over here, it's actually running down the horizontal axis. So the cool thing is we can essentially add additional isopalms on the model like we would do with the edges. So what this means is where an isopalm is built on a curve type of algorithm, and that means we can actually make use of the curve tools in here to generate certain shapes on the model. So if I were to go ahead and create some sort of a custom shape, I can then project that onto the surface and then add that as part of the geometry, or the mathematics that makes up the curved surface. On the other hand, if we had to do it on a polygon model, you're going to run into some issues. You're going to have to cut through certain edge components and face components to essentially make out this new shape, and that's going to end up with a lot more custom geometry or extra unnecessary points on the mesh that you have to clean up and deal with. So what I'm going to do is actually show you guys how we can deal with this project curve on surface on the different types of modeling methods, and show you the different issues that we will run into either and or. Obviously there's pros on this side, but there will be cons as well. To get the same type of thing will happen with the polygons. So let's start off with the NURB surface and actually show you how we deal with that. If I go into the surfaces menu set, you'll see you've got edit curves, you've got surfaces, and then you have edit NURBS. So these will be your primary 3 drop-down menus with all the tools you can use to manipulate curves as well as the surface on on the model. Well, if you want to work on this side, we have to work with polygons, and there we have the mesh, edit mesh, and mesh tools. So those are your polygon method type of approach. So back to the surfaces, I'm going to go and create a simple curve, NURBS curve, and I'm going to make it your regular circle. So that will be projected in the center. And then I'm just going to go ahead and jump to my 4-pane view and rotate it 90 degrees. Now I'm holding down J on the keyboard. That will allow me to essentially do an incremental snap of 15 degrees, and that is obviously set in the tool settings. You can see there's a discrete rotate, and if you turn this on, you can actually change the values. You can change it to 15, you can change it to 50, you can change it to 90, 45, anything that you want. I like the 5-degree increments. That will allow me to incrementally snap my rotational axes on my object with 5 incremental degrees at a time. And then with that, I'm going to move my circle in front of my object, which is on this side, and I'm just going to kind of line it up. Something like that. Just close up the tool settings, and then scale it up slightly. There we go. Great. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to actually use the circle to project the curve itself onto a 3-dimensional model that has volume and shape to it. While a curve is a 2-dimensional axis. So what's going to happen is it's going to create an intermediate type of projection on the surface, and then when I update this one on a 2-dimensional plane, the 3-dimensional projected curve will essentially update as well, which is very, very cool. So once I have that kind of lined up, the technique for this to work 100% accurate is to make sure that you select the curve and then the surface and then project it. But then the other thing to be aware of is it all depends on the camera that you're looking through. So if I were to view it through the perspective camera, and I go to I think it's edit NURBS and then project curve and surface, you will see that the result was projected on the mesh, but it projected this based on the camera angle that I initially started off with, and it's going to create a very oblong kind of strange looking curve that's projected on the surface, purely because my initial starting point was not 100% 90 degrees or parallel to the object. So what we want to do is, instead of projecting based on the perspective camera, I'm going to go to my front view, again select the 2. Okay, I'm going to select the curve, then the object, and I'm going to project it from the front view, which will leave me with a much more accurate projection, something that I would be much more happier with. So once I select my original curve, the projected curve turns purple-pink. That represents there's a live history connection to it, which means if I now move this curve on the surface, it will automatically update its position and placement. If I go and cross the curvature far beyond the range of the object, it's actually going to go across and repeat the same projection right through the shape all the way to the other side, which is great if you want to do something like a tennis ball, or something that requires some sort of overlapping to the other side of the model. Obviously, if I were to go to the component mode and manipulate some of these points on the mesh, the projected curve will again follow the surface, as this is a live update on the mesh. So once we have the curve projected, we have the ability to now go into the Edit NURBS menu and then choose what we want to do with this. We can either decide to cut based on that projected curve, or we can say maybe we want to trim the edge so that we take away everything outside of the shape, or maybe everything that's inside the shape. So if we go to the trim tool, Maya is asking me, what do I want to have left behind, or what do you want to take away? So inside the options of the actual primitive, of the trim tool rather, you have the option of keeping or discarding. So if I say keep, and I then click on the area that I want to keep, it's going to turn its edges into more of a solid line, which represents the area of what's going to be kept. Again, after that, you'll see down here in the options, it says press enter to trim the surface. So once I do that, it's actually going to cut it away, and then what you end up with is the final result of the projection that's been trimmed off. And since we still have this as a live update, I can now still move this around, maybe even manipulate the shape of the original curve, which will in turn, change up the profile of what's being cut away. Great stuff. So now that we have the basic understanding of how the project on curve works, the next step for us is to then do something with this mesh. You can either then create some other shapes with it, you can trim some more shapes off of it, and essentially design whatever you need with it at the end of the day. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to convert this mesh into polygons. The optimal result should always be in polygons, purely because of the reason that the industry standard is to work with polygons, and it's much easier to texture since it has proper UVs, and in general it's a lot easier to manage. So with the NURBS surface now, I can then go to modify and then convert, and you'll see there's an option for NURBS to polygons. I'm going to open up the options and just quickly demonstrate for you guys what we have in here. Essentially, we have options of changing the type from NURBS to polygons, and then we have options to change how it's going to run through the algorithm and figure out how to best match the shape that we have currently. So if I were to go to trim, or say trim the model, and then do quads or triangles, it's going to essentially generate a mesh that's either triangle based or obviously quad based. So if I undo this and go to quads, you're going to see that's definitely more of a quadded type of mesh. If you want a lot more control over how it actually manages to create the shape, you have to then go into the more specific tessellation options, and then choose how you want to generate the surface. At this point, the number of U points is represented based on the horizontal axes, and then the number of V spans is along the direction of the actual shape. That could depend obviously on your initial creation of the model. So a lot of times what I do is I like to change to let's say change this to 3, and I hit apply. It's actually going to create 3 divisions along the object. And we can obviously change this as much as we need to get the exact result. So I'm going to go to the next option, which is count, and then if I put it to count and I say I want 200 that represent in polygons, you're going to have 200 polygons that is used to represent the final shape. A lot of times you need a lot more, like something like 500, just to match the profile of the object with the original projection. You'll see I'm losing some detail over here, and I can keep on adding more polygons to represent this with to get a much cleaner result at the end of the day. And then obviously you have count points, and that's going to look at the actual points on the mesh, the trim mesh, to figure out how the algorithm is going to generate it. So if I hit apply, you'll see now, since it's using the count points of the original shape, original sphere, it's not really very accurate, and it's not going to give you what we're looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the settings to match whatever I feel like is representing the shape, and then once I come back I will show you the final result. Okay, great. So now that I'm back and I've picked up chose the options that I like the most, I ended up with a total of 30 spans along the direction of the actual object, of the U direction, and then I've decided to not add any subdivisions across the length of the model, purely because I feel like I can manipulate the shape afterwards a lot more accurate. So let's look at the final options. I chose to make everything quads. I decided to keep the tessellation method to general so that I have options of changing the U and V. I've decided 30 on the U and 1 division on the V, and then the secondary tessellation wasn't necessary as I don't want to create up some strange looking broken up triangles in between. So this is the result of a NURBS surface converted into a polygon surface, and you'll see they're lying right on top of each other. Now if I were to go into the group or into the outliner, you'll see there's a NURBS surface circle here, which is the original projection curve, and then if I open up the group, there's my NURBS surface, my original sphere, my NURBS sphere, and then the final NURBS to poly 1 is the result of the trimmed NURBS sphere, and that has the same settings as what I've ended up with the modify, convert, NURBS to polys, final tessellation options. Great stuff. So now that we have the end result, I'm going to use the same kind of technique and show you guys how we can do this on polygons, and what kind of issues we will run into. Just to quickly recap on what was the main issue here. The main issue with creating NURBS surfaces is that when we trim them, cut them up, and do whatever we need, we end up with the end result as a NURBS surface, and NURBS surfaces are very difficult to manipulate in the UV space, purely because it doesn't have the customizable UV coordinates to lay it out in a more specific way, in a custom shape, so that we can texture it properly. That's the main reason why I personally don't like to keep everything in NURBS space or a NURBS type of model method. So I end up converting it back to polygons, because then I can then use its polygon UV tool sets to actually create proper UVs, lay it out, and then take it into Photoshop or something like Mudbox to texture it. I'm gonna go and show you guys the next one, which is the polygon projection or project curve on polygon type of method. And again, I'm going to start off with something like a NURBS primitive and then a circle again. Very similar technique. I'm going to rotate this guy 90 degrees. Let's just type in 90 there, and then I'm going to bring it forward, and I'm just going to quickly align these two. I don't want to take too much time to align them. There we go, great stuff. So I'm going to bring it forward a bit more, and then I'm going to go to polygons, menu set over here at the top, and I will also be going into the edit mesh, and down here at the bottom where it says curves, you've got the project curve on mesh. You'll find this option in 2015 most likely, and in 2014, an older version, you'll just find it under edit mesh project curve on surface. They don't have the subcategories where you have to choose the different edges, vertices, or faces columns. So now that I have these two selected, again I'm going to go into my front view and then go to edit mesh and then project curve on surface. So once I do that, it's now projecting a NURBS circle Again, it's a parametric type of circle, which starts off with the U and then runs along and it ends up at the same spot, and projects that on a different type of modeling paradigm, which in this case is polygons. And we end up with a very strange looking result. If I select that projected curve and I look at its components, let's try again, trying to select the projected curve, and I go to its component mode by hitting F8, you will see that it ends up with a lot more divisions, and they're slightly broken up. They're not as clean and even as the original curve, and that's purely because it's going from one type of paradigm to a different type of paradigm, and you end up with some issues with how it transfers the information. So the projected curve now suddenly ends up with spans of 7t, whereas the initial one has only 8. So there you can see the big discrepancy between the two. The one is parametric, and then the projected curve is also parametric, which is fine. But now we have to deal with how it translates the information. The curve samples is how accurate it's going to try and project the details. And what I tend to do is leave everything as is. You can choose to say point on edges, which will then essentially look at only the components of the projected curve and try to match. Let me try and select the curve, go back to component mode, and you'll see you have much less amount of projected points on the surface, and that's purely because it's trying to match the connection to only the areas closest to the edges on the polygon model. And I tend to like that slightly more because it ends up with much less components to deal with at the end of the day. So I'm going to leave that to point on edges, and then obviously you still have the live update. So if I were to move this around, then the curve will still do exactly the same thing as it did with the NURBS surface. But we will have to clean up some extra unnecessary floating vertices on the projected curve. So now that I have these two lively connected, I have the ability to select the projected curve, which is Polygon Projection curve, and then the actual model, which is the polygon sphere, and go back to the mesh tools, or rather the edit mesh. You'll find here at the bottom there's a split mesh with projected curve. In this case, what it's going to do is actually give me the option of cutting the polygons according to the projected curve. Okay, if I open up the options, you have the option of splitting or splitting and detaching. So I'm going to keep it to split for now, and I'm going to do the same exact kind of method where I move this up, line it up to the opposite side. It's kind of half on either side, and maybe change up the components, bring it closer to each other, and then when I'm done, I'm just gonna have the projected curve selected in the outliner and then the polygon sphere, and then I'm gonna go and hit split mesh on projected curve. Immediately, as soon as you do that, Maya will essentially create actual edges on the model as if I were to use the multi-cut in the modeling toolkit, and then I've went along those guides and split the model. So it split up the model, but it's still one mesh. So what's the difference? When you create a model and you kind of just combine one part with another part, let's make it slightly more interactive to understand. If I take this and I'm going to duplicate the same model and just move it across to the other side. If I have these two selected and I just go to mesh combine, what Maya is doing is actually, even though they're not touching by any means, there's a massive gap in between, even though they're they're two shapes by themselves. When you hit the combine, Maya will kind of not group it, but rather mesh the two into one by looking at this and considering it as one shape instead of two shapes. It's not vertex welded at all. It's just how Maya manages to kind of combine two shapes into one and then allow it to move it based on one transform node. So if I go to, let's say, modify center pivot, you'll see I've got a single pivot that allows you to manipulate two shape nodes. This is great for if you need to quickly manage to move multiple objects at the same time. In this case, what we've done is Maya has gone into this process of actually projecting the curve onto the mesh, and then taking the projected curve, cutting up the model, and then keeping it in a combined state. So it's not detaching it as two separate shapes. It's still one shape, but if you look at the actual components, if I were to grab this edge and I move it out, you'll see that it's still combined as one shape. If you want to detach it, you'll have to go through this process of selecting the components that's in as part of the original projection, and then you need to separate them. So what I mean by that is I'm going to go to face mode and then start selecting the original components. I'm just going to do a small section. I'm not going to go and do the whole thing, just to explain the difference. And I'm going to deselect the ones that I don't want, like that. Let's say maybe add those over there. And then if I go to mesh and then separate, which will now go, or rather let's do mesh and then extract. So now that we have the extraction, it's actually making two separate shape nodes out of this. And if I open up the original sphere and I look at this, you'll see there's sphere 1, which is the original sphere, and then polysphere 2, which is now the actual cut out piece. And then these are both combined by one transform node, which is the original object, and but they're now two separate components for you to manipulate. So the only thing that I want to explain to you guys, by going through this process, I've managed to project this curve onto a polygon mesh. But now when I do the mesh, or edit mesh rather, split mesh with projected curve, the split option is only separating or adding those cuts along the model. It's not making it as a separate model like what we have over here. So if you want to detach it, then you have to make sure that the original option that you choose here is split and detach. This will allow you to avoid going through selecting the components and then editing the mesh and then say extracting. So it's almost like just going and doing that extra step for you for free. So I'm going to undo this process all the way before we have the original cut done. Almost there, and I don't have any undos anymore. That's typical, so it doesn't matter. I'm going to recreate that. Let's scale this up a bit, and let's do 30. Line it up with this one, modify, align it over here, align it over there. Great stuff. And then I'm going to reproject this onto the model. From the top view, I'm going to go to mesh, project curve on surface. Now that I have the projected curve, I'm going to quickly change that option again on the projected curve to say point on edges. And then finally, with these two selected, I'm going to go to split mesh and project on curve with detach. So once I do that, Maya will go through this process of detaching the two components. Just waiting for it to process. And we have a crash. I'll be back just now. And we're back. So the final projection ended up being successful with now these two meshes being detached. Now, detached does not mean it is physically extracted. It only means that these components are now two separate divisions inside of the actual model. If you just open up this, you'll see that it's still one sphere, but the vertices are now completely separated from each other. So now it's a completely open model. This is great for now if I want to quickly select the outside and pressing delete, and that's going to give me the final result on the projected model. This is my preferred method purely because I can then decide how I want to manipulate the polygon model afterwards. Yes, it does have the same original details on the surface. It's still making use of the same edges that the original sphere had, but I can obviously still go in and manipulate these edges, clean them up, and do whatever I need to, like giving it thickness and so on. But by all means, I have the ability to choose either the polygon method or the NURBS method, which I'm just going to redo again after my crash. Just quickly realign these two. Let's go to side view, get these two to be lined up. There we go. Project curve on surface. There we go. And let's quickly trim this edge, edit NURBS, trim, choose what I want to keep, and then finally go to modify, convert NURBS to polys, and then 30 over here and 1 over there, same settings, and hitting apply. So you end up with two different methods. You can keep the original mesh, obviously with the polygons, or you can just delete it afterwards and just leave the detached part of the model. Whereas on this side we trimmed it off and we ended up with just the piece that's left behind, and then you can convert it back to polygons afterwards. Since it's polygons now, I can then go and manipulate it exactly the same way I would do with a polygon project curve on surface. So now that you guys know how to actually use this method, I'm going to go through the modeling process of building this chair using this technique, and I'm going to throw in some extra things in there just to flare it up and give it some extra details. So I'm going to put these guys in a group, hide the group, and I'm going to start off with a polygon sphere. So the polygon sphere, my initial starting point is going to be something like this, and I'm going to go ahead and just manipulate some of the original shape just so that we have the base of that chair. In fact, what I'm going to do is bring in some reference. So I'm going to go, first of all, set my project, set project. I'm going to go to my documents. I'm going to go to my modeling techniques. I'm also going to set it there. Great. I'm going to do file. I'm going to bring in the image plane, and my image that I'm going to use is going to be this guy. Great stuff. I will also be moving it off to the side, so, and I also need to shrink it down a bit so it's slightly smaller. I'm going to put it off to the side, so I think it is offset if I'm not mistaken. There we go. A bit too much. There we go. I'm going to keep it there. So for now, what I'm going to do is build that base at the bottom, and then I'm going to create that egg kind of shape. And how I'm going to manipulate this to look more like an egg instead of a sphere is I'm going to make use of my Lattice tool, my Lattice freeform deformer. So first of all, I'm going to get rid of the end polygons. I'm going to have those selected. I'm holding down tab and clicking and dragging. This is part of the modeling toolkit, if you have the modeling toolkit installed or active on your computer, you can essentially just switch to any component type you want, and if I hold down tab, it's actually doing a raycast selection based on wherever your mouse is. So that's quite neat. It doesn't have much of a base, so I'm going to do a shift click drag extrude. I'm going to do it one more time, and then I'm going to do a scale type of extrude. So I'm holding down shift, going into the scale tool, and then I'm going to click scale, and that's going to allow me to push out. I'm going to pull this down a bit, and not too much, but I definitely want it to be further or wider, something like that. I'm going to do another edge extrusion down just to give it thickness on the base, and then I'm going to do scale inwards again, extrude in. Then now I want to close the gap in between. I'm going to do one extra extrusion, and then I'm going to go to shift right click, merge, and then merge to center, which will then quickly collapse it for me to the center point. Now that I have that, I'm going to refine these edges. I'm going to go to scale mode, just refine these, maybe bring this in a bit more, slightly up, and I'm also going to start beveling these edges so it's slightly rounder. So I'm going to go to the bevel tools, click on bevel, just maybe spread it out a bit more, and then giving it some extra 2 divisions, just round that profile out. Same thing is going to happen with this edge. I'm going to bevel it, I'm going to give it some 1 division, but spread it out slightly over a wider distance. And then I feel like this base is too thick. You can see the gap in there is very small, so I'm going to go ahead and select these faces, and I'm going to start moving these up. So I'm going to make sure I select everything over here, move this up. There we go. I still feel like it's too wide. I'm going to start selecting all these extra components. Now the way I do this, if you don't know how to quickly select a loop around the model, is if you hold down shift and you click on a component, like over here, and you go to the next one, you double click, it's actually going to do a loop select around the direction of the path that you started off with. I'm going to bring this up a bit more, and I need to just refine this a bit more, so I'm going to take out any extra details. I know I'm going backwards and forwards the whole time, but I feel like I need to make the thickness slightly more blocked out. So I'm going to grow the selection holding down shift, and then greater or smaller as, or comma and full stop. You can do that to quickly grow your selection, and then I'm going to manipulate these. There we go. I feel like that's a lot better. I'm going to also deselect this row, put it up a bit more. There we go. Now that feels more like a proper base. I'm going to use my multi-cut tool, and then I'm holding down Control Shift to place a center edge, and I'm going to scale this in just to round out that profile. Over here we have some long stretched out polygons. I'm going to use the Connect tool. I'm going to have the edge selected, click on Connect, and I'm going to middle mouse click and drag just to divide this into 3 sub sections, which leaves me with 4 polygons along this row. And now I can obviously pull this down or round it out a bit more if I need to. I feel like these guys should be more downwards. There we go. That gives me a nice kind of profile from this side. If I go to shaded view and I turn off my wireframe, you can see that nice profile. Great. So I've got this selected, I've got that organized. That's my good egg-shaped dome. And now, going from the sphere to the egg profile, we're going to need to use the actual lattice tool. You can find the lattice tool under deformation, the first one in the list, or if you want to know where's the menu way, you can go to the animation tools, and then there's a create deformer lattice. So that's where you would find it in the menu way. Okay, great. So now that we have this blocked out, the lattice tool will essentially manipulate the whole shape if you're in an object mode. So if I hit lattice, it's going to generate a lattice box around the model, which will allow me to manipulate the whole shape as is. But many times you don't want to be manipulating the whole shape at once. So what I'm going to do instead is actually select only the components that I want to manipulate. And in this case, I'm going to have the top vertex selected and holding down shift and then greater as or full stop, and I'm going to grow the selection and make sure I grow the selection all the way to the base just before the start of the leg begins. So I'm going to go up to about there, and that's going to give me or allow the lattice tool to only manipulate the selected type of components. Then I'm going to double click on the lattice this time, which will allow me to change some settings inside the lattice options. I'm going to change the default settings to be more like 3, 3, and 3. So 3 divisions along the U direction, the V direction, and depth direction. And I'm going to also make sure I turn off the option for local mode, which will kind of give me a more softer type of manipulation instead of this harsh kind of cut off where each division starts and ends. So actually I'm going to keep it on and show you the difference, what happens when you actually apply this. If you hit apply and you go to the lattice options, if you right click and say lattice points, and I grab some of these and I move them around, you'll see where the one starts and stops. It's actually creating this very harsh kind of cut. Sometimes you want this, sometimes you don't. If you turn off the option in the FFD modifier local, that's going to give you a much more smoother passing through those areas, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So I'm going to grab all the points at the top and start pulling this upwards, and that's going to already give me a much more egg-like type of shape. And I'm going to scale this down a bit more, which will kind of point things slightly more. And I'm going to grab the base and maybe widen that a bit more, just to give it more roundness, and then pull it down so the weight is more at the bottom. Right, so now that I have this, I'm going to just tweak it a bit more. Maybe I want to pull this back just to give it slightly offset. There we go. And now that I have this, I'm going to select the polygon shape that I initially started off with, and then I'm going to clear the history. The reason why I do that is so that the lattice deformer and the modifications to the lattice is now baked into the shape of the polygon model, and that will then get rid of the lattice tool for me, and then that leaves me with the result that I can then go and tweak further and manipulate. So now that I have the egg shape more precisely placed and shaped the way I want, I'm going to go in and start projecting the cut for the model onto the model, and then we're going to trim it off and then start creating the inner shape. So first things first, we will most likely start off with a NURBS primitive and again start with a circle, but we'll have to add some extra divisions along the circle profile. So with the curve created, if I go and pull this up a bit more, I'm going to go to the channel box and then go to the make NURBS circle, and you'll see you've got normal, you've got center, you've got radius, you've got sweep, and you've got degree. So these settings allow me to initially manipulate the parameters of the original curve. I'm going to increase the radius over here just to make it bigger. I'm going to bypass the 10 maximum and just type in something like 50. That might be a bit too big. Let's try 30. That feels a lot better. And I'm also going to rotate this 90 degrees along the z-axis. I'm going to go to z, type in 90. There we go. So we need to flatten the bottom and get the shape to look slightly more accurate to what the reference is set to. So I'm going to go back to the settings and just quickly talk about the cubic, the degree. If it's set to cubic, cubic means that it's actually taking in the smoothness of the circle in consideration. If you set this to linear, it's actually cutting this up into the control points, and then it kind of creates more of a linear path, a more straight path. Sometimes you want this, sometimes you don't. I'm going to choose cubic and just set the amount of divisions from the default 8 points to something more like 12 points, which will have more points for me to manipulate the profile and get a more accurate result. So I'm going to have that set, and then I'm going to select the actual curve, go to the side view, and I'm going to press F8 to go back to component mode and just bring the components down a bit more, and then maybe flatten it. So I'm using the scale tool to flatten this. I'm also going to grab the top components and scale them inwards so that we have more of a matching look to what the reference is set to. I'll bring this down, maybe scale this in. There we go. Let's look at the reference again. It's billowing out a bit more at the top, so I'm going to bring this down and out. And we might have to change it up as we go along after we've projected the shape on the model. But I'm happy with this as it is right now. I'm going to go back to object mode by pressing F8, or right clicking object mode. That gets you back to the object mode. And with the two selected, making sure that I look at the two head on, I'm going to go to the side view and then go to my polygons menu set, and then I'm going to change the projection, or add the projection rather. Good. So now that I have the projection on the model, you have to be aware of that the projected curve goes right through all the way to the other side. Many times we don't want to have the projection go all the way through when we do the cuts, so just make sure that you only select the one shape once you on the one side, so that when you cut it, it's only adding those two and not the additional one at the back. So now that I have this kind of set up, I can look at it and examine if the shape is exactly placed where I want. Maybe I want to bring this down a bit more, maybe I want to bring it up a bit more. I think where it was initially is exactly where I want it. I'm also going to manipulate the projected curve to be projected only on the edges. That's going to immediately reduce the amount of points on the projected curve. And once I have that, I'm going to make sure I only select the one side of the projection and then the model, and then go to in fact, I'm going to open up the plus so you can see there's projected curve 1, projected curve 2, and I'm not sure where the other ones are coming from, even though it says 3 and 4. So with only one selected and then the shape of the model, I'm going to go to the edit mesh and then project curve on surface. I'm also going to make sure I put on the detach component, which will then split up the model according to that path, and then I can actually now clear the history on the model, which will then get rid of the projection curves and then detach the live connection between the projected curve and the original NURBS circle 3. So with the polygon selected, I'm going to go to edit mesh, delete by type, history. That's a quick way of using the menu. If you want a hotkey, it's Shift Alt and D. That will also get rid of the history. So just quickly opening up the channel box so you can see what's happening here. If you hold down Shift Alt D for clearing history, it's going to get rid of the inputs that's initially stacked to create the history. So I've got that. I can now get rid of the projected curves as they are not needed anymore. I'm also going to put this guy in a layer and then get rid of my cut. So now that I have this deleted, I can then start modeling the interior part of my model. You can already see that there's a lot of cleanup done for me when I initially went into the setup process of telling the projected curve to only project towards the edges. But it's not cleaning it up 100%, and that's unfortunately one of the things that you'll have to deal with when you're projecting a parametric curve onto a geometry, or polygon geometry rather. That's just one of those things that you have to deal with. But nonetheless, it's still good enough for me to play with. If I go and select the border edge of the open model, by going to selecting one of these edges and then go to select and then select contiguous edges, it's going to run through the selection and trying to find all the edges along that path. Sometimes it doesn't select everything. You'll just have to make sure you continue the path by selecting contiguous edges. And I'm going to select that border edge and then go to extrude edges, or obviously you can use the modeling toolkit, extrude. I'm just using the marking menu. Once I have that extrusion, I'm going to make sure I use offset to pull in along that path, which will give me a cleaned up version of that projection, and I'm going to pull in. That's going to give me my actual thickness for the inner part. I'm going to bring this back a bit, it's too wide. Something like that should be good. And then once I have that, I'm just going to pull back with another extrusion, and then this time go to world space by pressing W in my move tool, and then that allows me to pull back. So you want to obviously create the dome-like shape, so you'll have to go ahead and try and pull this in using the scale tool. Don't want to be pulling it in too far. I'm going to do another extrude, pull back, and maybe a bit more. Now it's going too far at the top, something like that. And I'm going to actually scale this in along one direction, which will leave me with a flattened edge. If I go to wireframe, you can see it's now nicely and clean and flat at the back, which means I can pull this back a bit more. I'm going to do another extrude, pull back, and I'm going to start scaling this in along the center. There we go. Great stuff. So now that I have this projection, or this extrusion rather, I will be filling the hole on the inside, and then I'm going to try and connect these edges one by one across to the other side, as well as going up in a straight line. And then once I have cleaned it up, I'm going to use my sculpt geometry tool to smooth out the inner part to make it look a lot more polished and more rounded out. So I'm going to do a shift right click, and then I'm going to go to fill hole. You can also find that under the edit mesh, and then I think it is let's see if I can find it. It might be under mesh. Yeah, mesh, and then shape, fill hole. There we go. So once you have that, you can go and select this face and then say something like triangulate, which will create the inner triangles connected to all the edges, but it does a big mess, and I definitely don't want that. I'd rather use the multi-cut to connect this manually across. That's just going to leave it much cleaner for me. If I go to multi-cut and I choose to cut from one edge straight up to the other, and let's say from this edge all the way to this edge over here, and then start connecting everyone in between. So I'm going to quickly do that offline, and then when I come back I'll show you the result of that. Okay, I'm back. So you can see I've gone through this and connected all the edges in the cleanest possible way. What I'm going to do now is actually, you can see it's very kind of linear, and it doesn't look as nice and clean as it could. So what I'm going to use is the sculpt geometry tool and using the relax and smooth options inside of it to kind of get the shape to look a lot more balanced and more organic looking on the inside. So if I go to, let's say, the Polygons menu, and I double click on the actual sculpt geometry tool, it's going to bring up the tool settings for me, which will allow me to change the different operations to something like smooth and relax. So I'm going to start off with relax for the first process, and I'm also going to make sure I turn on the stroke options and then set up the reflection along the, let's say in this case it might be the z-axis. Yes, so the z-axis, and then I'm going to go ahead and start clicking on these edges and dragging on these edges. That will allow the tool to actually space out these polygons more in a natural type of progression, so that it looks more like the original cone. So just by doing this already, I'm getting a much cleaner result. You just have to be very careful to not affect the side edges or the areas that you want to maintain its original volume. That's just something to be aware of. And I was lucky enough that the sculpt geometry tool using the relax operation is giving me the exact result that I'm looking for in regards to how the smoothing works, that I don't have to really go into the smooth options. I might have to do it in some areas, like maybe here at the top. I'm going to go in and bring it down and just smooth this in a bit more. That's going to allow me to just bring the shapes together. The thing is, with the smooth tool, it actually collapses the shape in on itself, and sometimes we don't want that. We want to actually space everything out in a more volume-based type of method, and unfortunately the smooth tool doesn't always give me what I want. Great, so I'm already getting a much cooler looking result using this method, and I'll just go to wireframe and actually look at the shape. You can see that the shape is definitely more cone-like or more dome-like shape, and that's exactly what I'm looking for in regards to the original volume. And I can obviously go and play with this until I'm absolutely satisfied with the final looking of the result. But for now, I think this is good enough just to kind of explain the process of actually projecting a curve on a surface and then hollowing out something and then starting to manipulate the inside using the sculpt geometry tool. So I'm going to go ahead and add the other details on the inside, like the pillows and so on, off screen. In the next lesson, I will talk more about that using the soft modification tool, or soft selection rather, just to kind of sculpt the pillows and the shapes the way you would naturally do to make it look like it's organic and it's got some creases and folds. Thanks for watching this lesson, and I hope you guys learned something. Obviously, if there's any questions, please subscribe and comment down below, and I will surely get back to you on that. Take care, and I'll see you next time.